the public are at risk. It's taken us longer to get to you than it has ever taken. If you look in July 2022, for example, that heat wave we had, what would have normally been a wildfire, still dangerous, we still want to be able to prevent them, but they are wildfires, they tend to stay rural. Because we're getting there later and we're getting there with less firefighters and less resources, what you saw as those fires reach urban areas. We lost people's homes, we lost people's businesses, communities' infrastructure was destroyed, and we saw firefighter after firefighter go to hospital during that period as well. So the public are already at risk. If we don't rebuild, they remain at risk, but if we don't prepare for these oncoming challenges, they will continue to be at risk for some time. The National Risk Register, in fact, has wildfire, it has heat waves in it. We should be preparing for that. If we're not, over the period that has been included in the National Risk Register, we have just cut the fire service and the other services we rely on to respond to incidents such as that to the bone through 14 years of austerity. We are completely unresilient, completely unprepared. We need to make some radical decisions and changes now to turn that around.
Deregulation and safety standards, what does that look like for you on a day-to-day?
Well, ultimately it puts the community at greater risk. So building standards, we've seen the tragic event at Grenfell. That was a totally avoidable tragedy. That was deregulation of the fire safety industry, allowing private companies to enter the sector to do risk assessments. It was sampling of products. Health and safety, the health and safety executive have got a role to play. We've seen firefighters now, traditionally we would go to incidents with crews of 5. It's dropped to 4, and now in some brigades and some services in the country, they're even riding 3. And that means that our firefighters are taking greater risks to rescue people and to rescue property. They're risking their lives, and the public outcomes aren't good.
After 14 years of austerity under this previous government, we've seen 12,000 firefighters cut. We've seen the fire rescue service decimated. That means it's less safe for the public and it's less safe for firefighters going to work. Our response times are slower than they've ever been. That means it takes us longer to get to a fire when you have one, but also it's more developed and much more dangerous for us when we get there. Now, through that period, we've reaffiliated to the Labour Party. We've supported the policies within their manifesto, and now we feel it's the time for a Labour government to deliver for firefighters who have shown them support for so long. So today is the start of that demand, the start of those arguments. We've heard all the arguments today from the speakers. Our members now, about 1,000 firefighters, will go over into Parliament, take that information, take those arguments to the decision makers and start to rebuild our fire service.
How have cuts affected the fire service?
They've meant a record number of fire stations have closed in the past 14 years, a record number of fire engines have been axed, and it meant that even those fire engines are turning out, and they're turning out slower than they ever have done in 30 years. So when people dial 999, it takes longer to get to calls, and when it turns up, the fire engine will not have the same number of firefighters that it would have had 20 years ago.
When firefighters go to these incidents with crews that are too small, dangerously too small and under-resourced, it's not just those obvious risks that members of the public might think. The fire is obviously dangerous, a flood is dangerous, an accident can be dangerous, but we're at the fire for longer, so we're exposed much more and for much longer than to all of these cancer and illness causing contaminants which we now know exist within our occupation.
Quite often fire engines are going out with 4, which is actually minimum crewing, so we're looking to be pushing that back up to give us the numbers to ride with 5, and what that will do is reintroduce safety critical roles on the fire ground. If a fire engine turns up with 4 people, it is restricted in what it can do with regards to if it turns up with 5. Now, in metropolitan brigades, particularly in London here, you can have upwards of 20 fire engines turning up to a jobs, but with rural brigades like myself in Buckinghamshire, we could be looking at 2 or 3 fire engines as a maximum for a prolonged period of time, especially with the increase in numbers in high-rises, etc.
On a fire appliance, it's very simple. We have 5 firefighters, and that would be an officer in charge, that would be a driver of the appliance, that would be 2 firefighters wearing breathing apparatus, and then crucially the 5th person is there to monitor their air consumption and there to monitor the conditions of the property, the fire and the environment. That's been scrapped. So who is looking after the backs of our firefighters, our people, when they're going in there to save life and property?
Sounds very frightening.
It absolutely is, and we've made these calls, and unfortunately the employers are complicit in driving down costs, and we feel that they've got a very cavalier attitude towards the safety of our people.
I'll go back to that heat wave in July 2022. that incident I spoke about where a wildfire got into the urban areas and we lost those businesses, homes and infrastructure, we had members on the ground, the officers in charge of those fires, desperately calling for backup over their main scheme radios, only to be told there simply wasn't any coming because they didn't have any. And the perverse thing there is at the same time, we had fire engines that sat empty and idle all over the capital city, all over the country, because there simply isn't enough firefighters left to crew them. So you may walk past your local fire station and think that you have one. You may even see the fire engines inside and think that you have fire engines. That is not necessarily the case, because we've lost 12,000 firefighters. That's over 1 in 5 since 2010. So more often than not, there are not enough firefighters to actually get those fire engines to where they need to be. And if by some miracle they can, it's often done unsafely with crews that are too small.
Does it put the public at risk?
Yes, it does put the public at risk. One of the stories we gave in the rally there was about a hotel fire in Brighton, comparing 2 fires 20 years apart, one where the hotel was saved and one where it was destroyed. And the firefighters' view very clearly was that it was destroyed because of lack of resources. That if adequate resources had been there in promptly enough, then that particular building might have been saved. So these things are quite complex of how that feeds through, but it means that people's homes are being damaged more than they could have been. It means businesses being damaged more than they should have been, and sometimes, of course, it means that lives may be lost.
It's quite frightening to say that your response times have gotten longer. What does that look like?
Absolutely, but for us in Greater Manchester it's not been as impactful as you look at the smaller rural brigades across the country. We look at attendance times when you compare to Manchester, say 7 minutes, to other brigades 15, 20 minutes. So if you can imagine being in your house trapped in a fire, waiting for a fire engine to arrive in 15, 20 minutes, it's not a good place to be, and we want to see more investment, more money being put into the fire and rescue service so we can bring those response times down and ensure that we're getting to people as quickly as we possibly can. Life and death, ultimately, that's what we're talking. I mean, ultimately 7 minutes is still quite long, and we want to see that come down even further. For the bigger metropolitan brigades like Manchester, like West Midlands, like London, those response times are good. You look at the rural brigades like I've explained, that's a long time to be trapped in your bedroom with your family, waiting for a fire engine to arrive. So greater investment, reduce them response times, more firefighters on the streets, and improved terms and conditions are what we're seeking.
Our summers are getting hotter, our winters are getting wetter, so wildfires are becoming a real issue. The dryness is causing fires to spread, not just in woodland, but when we're struggling with water supplies. And then on the flip side of that, we're talking about the winters are getting wetter, so we've got natural flooding, flooding within rural environments, flooding within urban environments where towns and high streets are becoming essentially rivers, which are at increased risk of people living and working. So as a service, we are not statutorily obligated to provide water rescue. However, in my town alone, Newport Pagnell, we over the past few weeks we've had to be evacuating people from their properties through use of the boat because the water levels have been sufficiently high that they can't exit. And when you get water into a urban environment, you never know how it's going to act. So in many ways, it can be as dangerous as a fast-flowing river.
We've tried to have a professional dialogue with the previous government. We made submissions every time there was a budget. We made submissions to reviews of public spending. Sadly, in reality, we didn't make any progress, frankly, on that. We pushed them back on here and there, but not on the fundamentals, which was to cut their agenda of cutting public spending.
We want to see improvements on pay, on terms and conditions, and protect those conditions that we already fought really hard for over the past 10 to 15 years. And hopefully, with the Labour Party in charge, Labour government, we'll see greater improvements in pay and terms and conditions.
Can you talk to me about your day-to-day? Have you noticed a defunding over the past decade or so?
Absolutely. So if we look back to 2010 to today, there's approximately 12,000 less firefighters on the streets of the country, which is hugely impactful, especially for the smaller communities where there's less and less firefighters. Less and less fire engines means our response times have got longer. Our ability to get to people who are trapped and in danger has become longer. And with more investment, with more people, with the government investing further in the fire and rescue service, hopefully we'll see the firefighter numbers increase, which will improve our response to the communities that we serve.
I think people want to see change. They've lived through a cost of living crisis. They want to see that tackled. They've lived through 14 years at least, probably in reality, wage restraint since 2008, stagnating wages. People need to see that addressed. And that change, and I think Rachel Reeves in the forthcoming budget needs to think carefully about that, because if it's more doom and gloom, I don't think that will play out very well for the government.